Hello everyone. The moment my son, Ethan, introduced his fiancée, Vanessa, everything changed. I never expected it, but from the first time I laid eyes on her, something deep inside me just knew. She was beautiful, charming even. But there was something else, something beneath the surface that felt utterly wrong. Little did anyone know, I had a history with Vanessa that no one would ever believe. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel. I never expected to feel this way, but as I watched Ethan stand there, proud as ever, holding Vanessa's hand, something inside me snapped. I had spent my life building this family, this legacy. My grandmother founded our company, a dynasty that had provided for generations, and I was the one who had carried that torch for decades. Now, at 77, I should have been the one revered. But instead, I was starting to feel invisible. Ethan, my youngest, the one who had always been my baby, was getting married. I should have been thrilled, proud to see him happy. And Vanessa, she was everything anyone could want. Beautiful, charming, and seemingly perfect. But there was something in her eyes, something that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't explain it, not at first. It was more of an instinct, that feeling you get when someone smiles at you, but their eyes don't match the smile. It was subtle at first, but it didn't take long for me to feel the truth creeping in. From the moment we met, she was everything I feared. Vanessa was polite, but it felt like an act. At family gatherings, she would flash a perfect smile, act like the doting fiancé, but behind closed doors, when Ethan wasn't around, she was another person entirely. She treated me like a relic, something to be tolerated, not respected. It wasn't just me. She would make little jabs here and there about my age, my outdated ways, how I was stuck in the past while the world was moving forward. What bothered me the most was how she did it with such finesse. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but soon the signs were too clear to ignore. She had a way of speaking to me like I was a child, patronizing, dismissive. There were no outright insults, no direct confrontations. It was all the little things. The way she would raise an eyebrow when I spoke, as though my words didn't hold the weight they once did. She made it clear that she was the one in charge now. But it wasn't just the way Vanessa treated me. It was how Ethan was starting to pull away. He was my youngest. We'd always been close. He used to value my opinion, trust my judgment. But with Vanessa in the picture, that bond was slowly eroding. I could feel him slipping through my fingers, just like the rest of my children had in the past. But this time, it was different. Ethan wasn't just pulling away, he was choosing her over me. When I tried to voice my concerns about Vanessa, about her influence on him, Ethan called me toxic. He said I was being unreasonable, that I didn't approve of anyone he brought into his life. But this wasn't just about Vanessa. It was about something deeper. A change that I couldn't quite name. Something I knew was happening to my family, my children, my legacy. They were slipping away, and I had no control over it anymore. It wasn't just the way Vanessa made me feel, either. It was the way my children were beginning to side with her. They looked at me as if I were the problem, a relic, a woman who couldn't adapt. They didn't understand the threat Vanessa posed. They didn't see the sharpness beneath her charm. I had spent years building this family, this company, and now I was being treated like an outsider in my own home. But something in me refused to let go. I might be 77, but I wasn't ready to fade into the background just yet. Vanessa had her designs, and I was determined to find out what they were. I was going to protect Ethan, whether he wanted it or not. This wasn't just about me. This was about the family that had been built from the ground up, the legacy that Vanessa seemed intent on destroying. I was starting to realize that this wasn't just some passing phase. This wasn't just a young woman getting under my skin. This was a fight I wasn't about to lose. The question was, how far was Vanessa willing to go to get what she wanted? And how far was I willing to go to stop her? One thing was certain. She had no idea what she was dealing with. The family gatherings became unbearable after Vanessa entered the picture. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. Maybe I was just getting older, more set in my ways, more sensitive. But with each passing day, the tension between Vanessa and me grew more palpable. She wore her charm like armor, sweet and compliant in front of everyone. But as soon as we were alone, that facade would crack. The subtle remarks, the cutting glances, nothing overt, but just enough to make me feel small, insignificant. At first, it was easy to brush off. Maybe she was just nervous, trying to fit into our world, into this family that had been built over generations. But soon, it became clear that her charm wasn't just an act. It was part of a strategy. Vanessa, with her soft voice and perfect smile, was positioning herself to be the center of attention, the one everyone turned to. It was as if she wanted to replace me, to rewrite the family's history, as if I never existed. She started making comments about the company, about my role in it. One evening at dinner, she casually remarked, "The business has come a long way, but maybe it's time for a new direction, don't you think?" I could feel my heart clench, the sting of her words, as if everything I had worked for, everything my grandmother had built, was somehow outdated, destined to be replaced by whatever vision Vanessa had in mind. And it wasn't just the business. At every family event, she'd tell everyone how much she admired Ethan's modern perspective on life, on business, on everything. The implication was always clear. The old ways, my ways, were irrelevant. I was the obstacle she had to navigate, and she wasn't even subtle about it. But it wasn't just her disdain for me that bothered me. It was the way she started to ingratiate herself with Ethan, little by little, strategically weaving herself into his life. She'd speak with him in a soft, almost coaxing tone, as if asking his opinion on everything, but I could see the manipulation in her eyes. She knew how to make him feel like the decisions he was making were all his own, even as she carefully guided him in her direction. She started planting ideas, making him question my influence, my authority over the family. It was like a slow poison. I couldn't help but notice how easily Ethan was falling for it. He used to be so strong, so sure of himself, and we had always been a team, he and I. But now, whenever I tried to speak up, he would roll his eyes, dismiss me with a wave of his hand. "You're stuck in the past, Mom," he'd say. "Just let me make my own decisions." The words stung more than I cared to admit, but Vanessa wasn't the only one pushing me out. My other children, who had once looked up to me with admiration, were starting to join Ethan's side, siding with her vision for the future. They said I was being difficult, too controlling. "You're not keeping up with the times," they said, as if that was a valid reason to toss everything I had built aside. It was becoming clear that I was losing my grip on the family. I wasn't just losing Ethan. I was losing everything I had worked for, my legacy, my role as the matriarch. And the worst part? No one saw it. No one but me. One evening, after another uncomfortable dinner, where Vanessa had expertly steered the conversation toward my old-fashioned ways, I retreated to my study. I couldn't help it. I had to know more. I had to understand why Vanessa was so determined to undermine everything I had spent my life building. I started digging, quietly at first, as if I were trying to find an old family heirloom in the back of a closet. I reached out to old contacts, people who knew Vanessa before she met Ethan. What I found was more disturbing than I ever could have imagined. Vanessa wasn't just some woman who wanted to marry Ethan. She had a pattern, a dangerous one. She had manipulated men before, and not just for love. It was always about money, about power, about controlling the very things that people like me had worked our whole lives to build. As I pieced together the fragments of her past, everything started to make sense. Vanessa wasn't in love with Ethan. She was in love with what Ethan could give her. She was already planning her next move, the next step in her game. I could feel it in my bones. She had set her sights on the family fortune, the company, the life I had built, and she was going to take it all. I had always prided myself on being sharp, on seeing things others couldn't. I wasn't about to let her take everything from me, not without a fight. Ethan might have been blind to her manipulation, but I wasn't. I had been through too much, seen too many things, to let her worm her way into my family's history. I was going to stop her, but it was going to take more than just a few well-placed words or a simple confrontation. Vanessa was clever. She had already begun to separate me from Ethan, from the rest of the family. It was going to take something more subtle, more calculated, and I was ready to give it everything I had. The question now was, How long could I keep up the act before it all came crashing down? I wasn't blind. I could see what Vanessa was doing, how she was weaving her way deeper into Ethan's life, pulling him further from me with each passing day. It wasn't just the way she whispered in his ear, making him doubt me, or how she smiled sweetly while cutting me down. It was her past that I needed to understand. I had lived long enough to know when something wasn't right, when a person's charm was just a mask hiding something darker. Vanessa's past wasn't a mystery to me anymore. It was a threat. And the deeper I dug, the more I uncovered. Vanessa had done this before. She'd done it to other wealthy men, lured them in with her beauty and her soft words, all while plotting to take their money, their power. I couldn't believe it at first. How could someone so seemingly perfect be so manipulative? But there it was, clear as day. Vanessa hadn't just fallen in love with Ethan. She had targeted him. Her eyes weren't on him. They were on the name, on the wealth that came with it. She wanted the life Ethan could give her. And once she had him, she planned to seize control of everything I had built. I felt sick to my stomach. I began to learn more about her, reaching out to old friends, even digging into records I hadn't thought to revisit in years. I wasn't the only one who had felt her cold touch. Vanessa had played her game before, weaving herself into the lives of other rich families, convincing them she was the perfect partner, the perfect wife, only to turn her attention to their fortunes. It was the same story every time, charming, persuasive, seemingly sincere until she got what she wanted. But this time, I wouldn't let her win. I couldn't. I thought I had lost everything when Ethan began pushing me away. The more I looked into Vanessa's past, the clearer it became that she had already begun to poison Ethan's mind against me. He was no longer the young man I knew, the one who'd once looked up to me, trusted me. Now he was distant, questioning my every move, undermining my decisions, turning away from everything I'd taught him. He didn't see it. He didn't see Vanessa for who she really was. But I could see it all. I saw Vanessa's reach in every conversation, every decision Ethan made. She was in his ear, whispering about change, about progress, about how he needed to distance himself from the past, my past. And just like that, she had woven a divide between us. She was slowly pushing me out of my own family, making sure Ethan stood by her side. I couldn't let that happen, not without a fight. I was no longer playing the role of the proud matriarch sitting in the background. I had to take action. I started to plan, quietly and methodically. I wasn't going to confront Vanessa head-on. That wasn't my style. I had built my life on discretion, on strategy. I'd been at the top of the game for too long to let her take me down without a fight. Every word she spoke, every move she made, I took note. Every conversation with Ethan that left me cold, I stored away in my mind, understanding the ways she was manipulating him, subtly shifting his view of me. But I wasn't powerless. Far from it. I knew this game better than anyone. If Vanessa thought she could take everything from me, my son, my family, my legacy, she was about to learn how wrong she was. It was time for me to make my move. The war wasn't over yet. In fact, it had only just begun. As I planned my next move, I couldn't help but reflect on the life I had built. In moments of quiet, the memories flooded back. I saw myself as a young woman, full of ambition, determined to keep my family together and thriving. I was strong, and I knew I had to be. My grandmother had built our legacy, and I carried it on with everything I had. There were sacrifices, of course. I spent years balancing the needs of the family and the demands of the business. I watched as my children grew, each one moving away in their own way. But Ethan was always different. He was my baby, the one who looked up to me the most. The bond we shared was special, unbreakable. But as the years passed, things changed. Ethan became distant, and Vanessa's grip on him tightened. The love and loyalty we once shared was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't stop it. I had been the rock of this family, the one they relied on. But now, it seemed like everything I'd worked for was crumbling. The empire my grandmother had built was at risk, and I wasn't about to lose it without a fight. I had to be smart. This wasn't just about protecting my legacy, it was about saving my family. I couldn't let Vanessa destroy what I had fought so hard to build. The stakes had never been higher. Every day, Vanessa grew more confident, more strategic in her actions. She no longer just played the role of the sweet fiancée. She had become a key figure in the family's decisions, especially Ethan's. At first, it was subtle. Little comments here and there, gently swaying him, but soon it was impossible to ignore. She began questioning my authority openly, undermining my input in front of others. Her influence over Ethan was undeniable. What disturbed me most was how easily he had fallen into her trap. He who used to respect my judgment now took Vanessa's side without a second thought. She spoke with such authority, with such calm certainty, that he no longer saw my warnings or my wisdom. She wasn't just his fiancée anymore. She was his partner, his advisor, his voice of reason. And it wasn't just Ethan. Vanessa was a master at manipulating the others, too. She made sure they saw her as the perfect woman for him. So understanding, so modern, so capable. It didn't take long for the rest of the family to follow suit. My own children, who once relied on me, now leaned on her opinions. Every conversation, every meeting, every family gathering seemed to revolve around Vanessa's vision for the future. Meanwhile, I was slowly being pushed aside. I was excluded from crucial meetings about the business, meetings I should have been leading. Vanessa began making decisions about the company's future without even consulting me. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being erased. I wasn't going to let her have the last word. I couldn't just sit back and watch her tear apart everything I'd built. But I had to be careful. I knew I couldn't confront her directly yet, not with Ethan, so fully under her influence. No, this required a more delicate approach, a more silent, more calculated plan. I had to stay hidden in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The walls were closing in on me. Every day, I felt more isolated, more like a stranger in my own life. Vanessa had woven herself so deeply into the fabric of our family that even my children seemed to have forgotten who I was. Ethan, the son I had raised with so much care, the one who used to confide in me, now looked at me with barely veiled frustration. He accused me of being controlling, of suffocating him with my expectations. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. "You're toxic, Mom," he said one evening, his voice cold and sharp. "Why can't you just let me live my life? Let me make my own decisions?" I couldn't believe it. How had it come to this? He used to come to me for guidance, for reassurance. But now, Vanessa had become his sounding board, his voice of reason. She had successfully turned him against me, not with overt hostility, but with subtle manipulation. She'd convinced him that I was the problem, that I was too old-fashioned, too controlling, and worst of all, Ethan believed it. The rest of my children weren't far behind. Olivia, my eldest, had always been my rock, the one who understood the weight of our legacy. But even she began to side with Vanessa, slowly distancing herself from me. I was no longer the matriarch they once respected. I was now just an obstacle to the future they wanted, a relic of a time they thought was gone. It wasn't just the betrayal from Ethan or my other children that hurt. It was the way they made me feel like I no longer had a place in their lives. I was too old-fashioned, too out of touch. They couldn't understand why I was fighting so hard against Vanessa, why I couldn't just accept the changes. To them, I was just a woman clinging to a past that didn't matter anymore. But they were wrong. I wasn't just fighting for control or power. I was fighting for the family, for the legacy that had been built by my grandmother, by me. Vanessa wasn't just a threat to me personally. She was a threat to everything we had worked for, and I wasn't going to let her destroy it without a fight. I knew I couldn't confront Ethan directly, not yet. He was too far gone, too wrapped up in Vanessa's web. But I could see the cracks starting to show. He was no longer the man I raised. He was someone else entirely, someone I didn't recognize. But I had to stay calm. I had to bide my time. The worst part wasn't just being ignored by my children. It was the sense that I was losing them piece by piece. They weren't just rejecting my control over the business. They were rejecting me, the very woman who had held this family together for so long. And still, I couldn't give up. I wouldn't. I was a fighter. My entire life had been about protecting my family. And now, even if they couldn't see it, I had to protect them from Vanessa, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies. I needed someone who still believed in the old ways, in the strength of family. And that's when I realized I wasn't entirely alone. There were still pieces of the old family I could rely on. Not my children, at least not for now. But there were others, old friends, trusted employees, people who still believed in what I had built. I began reaching out to them quietly, gathering what I needed. It wasn't about making a public stand. It wasn't about fighting in front of Ethan or Vanessa. It was about building a foundation of support, one that would give me the strength to finally show them the truth. As the days passed, the tension in the family only grew. I watched from the sidelines as Vanessa continued to manipulate Ethan, pulling him further from me. But I wasn't ready to give up. I had one final play to make, and it wasn't going to be a direct confrontation. I would bide my time. I would wait until Vanessa's own greed and ambition made her overstep. And when that happened, I would be ready. For now, I had to survive. The day of Ethan's wedding arrived, and everything about it felt surreal. As I sat in the back of the church, my eyes fixed on Ethan standing there, looking every bit the proud, handsome groom, something in my chest tightened. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. I could see it, feel it deep in my bones. I wasn't just losing him as a son. I was losing the entire family I had fought so hard to keep together. Vanessa stood next to him, radiant, the picture of perfection. The way she smiled at Ethan, so loving, so calm, it sickened me. She was playing her part to perfection, weaving herself into the fabric of his life. To the outside world, this was a beautiful, happy occasion, but I knew better. This wedding wasn't about love, it was about control. Vanessa wasn't marrying Ethan because she cared for him. She was marrying him because he was her ticket to everything she'd ever wanted: wealth, power, and influence. I watched her every move, every word she spoke. As the ceremony progressed, Vanessa kept her gaze locked on Ethan like a predator waiting to claim her prey. I knew she had already claimed him. Ethan's eyes were soft, full of admiration for her. It made my stomach churn. He was so blinded by her charms, he didn't see what was happening right in front of him. The vows were exchanged, promises of forever made with such sincerity. But I saw through it all. This wasn't a union of two people who truly loved each other. This was a transaction, and Vanessa was the one calling the shots. And yet, in the middle of all this, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my own isolation. My children, my flesh and blood, were standing by, witnessing this marriage, this new life Ethan was about to embark on, a life without me. My family, my legacy, was slipping away piece by piece. As they kissed, sealing their vows, I could feel my heart break. I had never been a woman to back down, but watching Ethan embrace her, holding her close as if she was the only thing that mattered, I felt my control over him slipping away for good. But as the applause filled the air, as the guests rose to their feet in celebration, something inside me snapped. I could feel it. This was only the beginning. The wedding may have been the grand spectacle, but Vanessa's real manipulation was just starting. It was all too obvious now. The way she held on to Ethan, the way she directed every conversation, the way she subtly isolated him from everyone else, it was like watching a well-rehearsed play unfold. I couldn't sit by and let this happen. Not anymore. If I let them leave today as husband and wife without intervening, I would lose him forever. The very thought of it drove me to action. But what could I do? What did I have left to hold on to? I had already been pushed to the edges of my own family. Ethan was already so far gone, so deeply under her control, that confronting him would only push him further into her arms. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to be patient. The wedding may have been Vanessa's victory, but I had a plan. I wasn't going to let her tear apart everything I had built without a fight. The real battle was just beginning, and I was about to make my move, but for now, I had to wait. The night was filled with celebrations, but in my heart, I felt only the quiet stirrings of a storm brewing. The days following Ethan and Vanessa's wedding passed in a blur, each moment heavy with the weight of what was happening right under my nose. I couldn't sit idle while Vanessa wormed her way further into Ethan's life, making decisions that should have been mine. She had already begun pulling the strings, taking control of things I had spent years building: my business, my legacy, my family. It was all slipping through my fingers, but I wasn't ready to let go. I knew I had to be subtle. Direct confrontation would only push Ethan further into Vanessa's arms, and I couldn't risk that. I had to be clever, sowing seeds of doubt in ways that would make others question her true intentions. I started small, casual conversations with the people who still respected me. People who had known Vanessa before she'd ever set her sights on Ethan. I planted the idea that maybe, just maybe, Vanessa wasn't all she appeared to be. I whispered to a few of the old guard in our social circle, those who had seen the way Vanessa moved from man to man in her past, always seeking out wealth, always using her looks to charm and manipulate. I didn't outright accuse her. No, that would be too obvious. Instead, I let the rumors spread naturally, allowing people to wonder. Let them question her true motives. Let them doubt her intentions without me lifting a finger. All I had to do was provide the spark, and Vanessa would do the rest. The whispers would grow louder with each passing day, but as I began to plant these seeds of discord, I didn't expect Vanessa to be so quick to retaliate. She was more astute than I had given her credit for. It wasn't long before I started hearing whispers of my own. Vanessa had already turned the tables, painting me as the villain in the story, the mother-in-law from hell. She made sure to emphasize how I was controlling and outdated, constantly feeding Ethan's doubts about me. She had learned how to manipulate him so well, turning every subtle jab I made into a reason for him to side with her. She spun her lies with such ease that even Ethan, my own son, began to believe them. I could see the way he looked at me now, the growing resentment in his eyes. He accused me of being too harsh, of not letting him live his own life. The daughter I had once been close to, Olivia, started distancing herself as well. It was like watching everything I had worked for crumble away. Vanessa had managed to convince them all that I was the problem, that I was the toxic one. But I wouldn't give up. I couldn't. It wasn't just about the rumors anymore. It was about saving my family, saving Ethan from himself. I had to keep playing the game, pushing Vanessa further into the corner, watching for any misstep she made. I had already seen the cracks in her carefully constructed image. She was so desperate to maintain control, so greedy for what Ethan could give her, that eventually she would slip. I just had to wait, and when she did, I would be ready. Vanessa's grip on Ethan, and on everything I had worked for, was tightening with every passing day. I had watched her with growing dread as she became more brazen in her efforts to take control, not just of Ethan, but of the entire family business. Every decision she made was leading us further away from the legacy my grandmother had built and I had fought to protect. At first, it was small things. Changes in business strategies, subtle adjustments to the company's operations that seemed harmless enough. But soon, Vanessa was making decisions that threatened the very foundation of our empire. She started pushing Ethan to invest in risky ventures, ideas that had no place in the company's stable future. Her influence over him was clear now, and he, for all his intelligence, had become blind to the consequences. One afternoon, I overheard Vanessa and Ethan in the study, discussing the next steps for the business. Ethan sounded so certain, so eager to follow Vanessa's lead. "This is the future, Mom," he had said when I questioned him. "It's time we evolve. We can't keep running the company the way you did." His words cut deeper than I could have anticipated, but Vanessa was making a fatal mistake. She thought she could outsmart me, play me at my own game. She didn't realize how much I knew about this world, the way deals were made, the way things worked behind closed doors. And that was where I would strike. I began to move quietly, building my network, reaching out to the people who had stood by me for years, the ones who still believed in the family's legacy. I was careful, making sure not to alert Vanessa or Ethan to what I was doing. It wasn't time for confrontation yet, but the truth needed to come out. The rest of my children, those who still had their heads buried in the sand, needed to see Vanessa for what she was. I started with Olivia, my eldest, the one who had once admired my strength. It wasn't easy, but I managed to get her alone for a quiet conversation. "You don't see it, do you?" I asked her, my voice low but steady. "Vanessa isn't interested in Ethan for love. She's after the empire. She's manipulating him, and she's using all of you to get what she wants." Olivia's face was a mixture of disbelief and guilt. "Mom," she said, "what are you saying? You're the one who's been pushing everyone away. You've been so controlling. You don't understand Ethan's vision. You're stuck in the past." but I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes, just enough for me to know that the seeds had been planted. Next, I reached out to David, my second oldest son, and even James, the youngest of the boys. I didn't confront them, not directly. Instead, I used what I knew: documents, old emails, and records of Vanessa's past dealings with other wealthy families. I showed them the pattern, the history of her manipulation. "Do you want to watch this happen to Ethan?" I asked, my voice shaking with the weight of it all. "Do you want to let her tear everything down?" And slowly, as I had hoped, the walls began to crack. David, James, and even Olivia started to question Vanessa's motives. They couldn't ignore the evidence any longer, and they began to see the web Vanessa had spun. They were finally waking up to the reality that I had tried to warn them about from the beginning. The moment had arrived. I had done everything I could in the shadows. Now, I was ready to confront Vanessa head-on. The family gathered for a meeting, one that Vanessa had set up, likely to push her next set of changes through. She was so sure of herself, so confident that her manipulation had worked, but she was wrong. I stood up, my voice steady and clear, commanding the room's attention. "Ethan," I said, "I have to show you something. Vanessa is not the woman you think she is. She's been using you to get what she wants. This isn't about love. It never was." I turned to the others, looking them in the eye. "This company is not for sale. It's not something to be gambled with for a quick profit. You all need to understand what Vanessa is really doing. She's not just manipulating Ethan. She's manipulating all of you." The room fell silent. Ethan's eyes widened with shock as I presented the evidence. Emails, records, her past manipulations. All of it was there, undeniable. Vanessa's calm demeanor faltered for the first time. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but the truth was out. She had been caught. "Ethan," I said softly, looking him in the eye, "you've been blinded by her, but you need to see the truth. She's playing you, and she's playing all of us." There was a moment of stillness before the storm broke. Ethan, his face pale, turned to Vanessa, who was now visibly shaken, her carefully crafted persona cracking. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice low and strained. The room waited in anticipation for her answer. Vanessa didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was trembling, but still laced with the same manipulation I had seen from the start. "Ethan, you can't believe her. She's trying to control you, just like she's controlled everything else in this family." But it was too late. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Ethan wasn't looking at me with anger anymore. He was looking at me with something else, something closer to realization. He had been manipulated, and it hurt him more than anything. The bond we once shared, the trust we had, was broken. But in that moment, I saw something else: guilt. He realized that he had been blind to the truth, and he knew now how much he had hurt me. The silence was deafening. Every eye was on me as I stood in front of my family, every person waiting for the next words to leave my lips. Ethan, Vanessa, my other children, all of them seated around the large oak table, each of them caught between disbelief and growing suspicion. Vanessa had no idea what was coming. She had thought she had won. She had thought her manipulations had been successful, that she had wrapped Ethan and the rest of the family around her finger. But I had been patient. I had spent weeks, even months, planning this moment. And now it was finally here. The truth needed to come out. I looked at Ethan first, his eyes still filled with confusion, still struggling to grasp the enormity of what was unfolding. "Ethan, you need to hear this," I said, my voice steady, but filled with an emotion I could no longer hide. "Everything she's told you, everything she's promised, none of it is real. Vanessa doesn't love you. She's been using you from the start." The room fell silent as Vanessa's face drained of color. Her practiced smile faltered for the first time. "What is she talking about, Ethan?" Vanessa asked, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "You can't believe her. This is just her trying to control everything again. She's always been like this." But the evidence was irrefutable. I pulled out the documents, the emails, the communications I had carefully gathered over the past few weeks, the emails between Vanessa and her old partners, the ones where she discussed strategies for getting access to wealthy men's families, where she laid out plans to use Ethan's position for her own gain. I laid it all out on the table in front of them. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the printouts. "Look at what she's done before. This isn't love. This is a pattern of manipulation. She has used everyone she's ever been involved with, and now she's using you. All of you." Vanessa tried to defend herself, but her words were hollow. She stammered. She deflected. But the truth was clear. Ethan's face contorted with a mix of anger and pain as he read the evidence. His eyes flicking back to Vanessa, his voice shook as he asked, "Is this true?" For the first time since I had known her, Vanessa hesitated. The mask she had worn so carefully started to crack. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "You have to believe me. I love you." But Ethan's eyes had already shifted. He looked at me, not with the scorn he had shown just days before, but with a dawning realization. He had been manipulated, and it hurt him more than anything. The bond we once shared, the trust we had, was broken. But in that moment, I saw something else. Guilt. He realized that he had been blind to the truth, and he knew now how much he had hurt me. The silence was deafening. Vanessa tried one last time to salvage her image, but Ethan no longer believed her. She had been exposed, her lies no longer hidden behind the carefully crafted facade. The wedding, the vows, the promises, all of it had been a lie. It didn't take long for Vanessa to show her true colors. As soon as she realized Ethan was no longer under her control, she tried to salvage what she could. She started making moves behind the scenes, trying to take as much of the family fortune as she could, but she underestimated me. I had watched her carefully, knowing that the moment she thought she was free, she would make her move. The emails, the documents, the calls she had made, she was trying to orchestrate a way to abscond with a significant portion of the family's assets. She thought she could escape, undetected, that Ethan's loyalty would still shield her. But I was already ahead of her. I traced every step she made, every move she tried to make to liquidate assets, to redirect funds. I reached out to the trusted advisors, the employees who still believed in the integrity of this company, and together we tracked her every move. I had her cornered. When she tried to flee with a large sum of money, I was waiting for her. She didn't know it, but her every move had been shadowed. Ethan was devastated when I showed him the evidence. Her plan to steal from the family, to ruin everything. There was no more pretending. "Where do you think you're going, Vanessa?" I said, my voice calm, but my anger simmering beneath the surface. Vanessa froze when she saw me standing at the door, holding the final pieces of her betrayal. There was no escaping now. The lies were over, and her plan had failed. Ethan stood there, unable to look her in the eye. He had been so willing to follow her, to believe her lies, but now he had seen everything. Vanessa had no more excuses. She was finished. The aftermath was painful, but necessary. Vanessa was gone. She was exposed for who she truly was, and the damage she had done was irreversible. Ethan, lost in the wake of his own mistakes, tried to reach out to me. His guilt was overwhelming, but the bridge between us had been burned. It wasn't enough just to apologize. It wasn't enough to say sorry for what had happened. But over time, we began to rebuild. Slowly, Ethan had to earn my trust back, piece by piece. The damage had been done, but I could see the remorse in his eyes. The realization of how deeply he had been manipulated. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was a start. I had lost so much, but I had gained something, too. I had regained my place in my family, not through force, but through the truth. The betrayal had been deep, but I was stronger than ever. I wasn't just the woman who had built this empire. I was its protector, its heart. The family, though scarred, began to rebuild. Slowly, we started to find our way back to each other. It would take time, but the wounds would heal. And through it all, I knew one thing for certain. My legacy was secure, my dignity intact, and I had proven that even in the face of betrayal, the truth would always rise to the surface. And that, in the end, was enough. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.